All right, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for tonight's mental health town hall. My name is Dr. Jessica Hawks, and I'll share a little bit more about myself here in a moment, but want to just start out with a couple of different housekeeping things. So first, just want to review our legal disclaimer here, and just highlight that while the panelists that we'll have here today are mental health professionals, this presentation is not intended to take the place of personal medical advice, and that we would recommend that you seek consultation with a healthcare professional directly if needed. And I'm really excited to announce that we are fortunate to have a live medical interpreter for Spanish-speaking families this evening. And if you would like to listen to the live interpretation, instructions are listed here and available in the chat. And here is just a brief overview of the agenda that we're going to cover this evening. So we'll start out by doing introductions so that you can get to know the panelists that you'll be hearing from this evening. We have three expert mental health professionals that will be joining us this evening to talk about anxiety, supporting youth with stress management, and then empowering youth suicide prevention and awareness. We will also have an open question and answer period at the end through chat, and then we'll wrap up with mental health resources. We are recording this town hall and we plan to share it online when it's available, and you all are muted. So if you have any comments or questions, you're welcome to share it in the chat, and we'll look forward to a great discussion this evening. And please feel free to ask questions as the program is unfolding this evening, and we'll respond with links when there are resources available immediately, but then we'll also work to answer as many questions as we can at the end. So to just start us off, I just want to first express my gratitude for everybody that has joined us for tonight's mental health town hall. We know that families are so busy and stressed, and the evening time can be particularly busy. And we just really appreciate that you are prioritizing your family's resilience and mental health this evening. Discussions such as this are so critical in our world today, where our youth are experiencing unprecedented mental health challenges, and we look forward to sharing information that we hope will be helpful. So to briefly introduce myself, like I mentioned, my name is Dr. Jessica Hawks, and I am a licensed child and adolescent psychologist. I hold the Dell and Cindy Francescan Endowed Chair for Mood Disorders, and I'm the clinical director of our pediatric mental health service line here at Children's Hospital, Colorado. I'm also an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry within the University of Colorado School of Medicine. And I will be honored to serve as your moderator this evening. So like I mentioned, that we would love to just get everyone a chance to learn a little bit about the panelists that'll be speaking with you this evening, and have an opportunity to hear a little bit about them both personally and professionally. So I will kick us off and then hand it over to each of our panelists. So I have worked here at Children's Hospital for approximately 10 years. And I am married, and I have twin 4-year-old boys who keep me very busy. And I am passionate about mental health because I experienced early in my own life the impact that mental health can have on children and families, as well as a significant impact that the right supports that a child can get access to early in life can really impact their overall life trajectory. And I'm honored to serve in a career where I feel like I can help children and families early on in their lives. So Colette, Dr. Fisher, I'm going to kick it off to you if you could share a little bit about yourself with the audience.
My name is Colette Fisher. I am also a licensed psychologist. I am returning to Children's Colorado and the university. I completed my postdoc here, and since then I've worked in a number of schools and then also hospital and healthcare settings. So in returning to Children's and the university, I've been here for a few months now, and I'm just really excited to be back and to the awareness and advocacy that Children's is doing. I'm really excited to be joining the teams again.
Thank you so much, Colette. We're super excited that you came back. Dr. Nunez Moreno, if you'd like to go next.
Hi, my name's Marissa Nunes Moreno. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a psychologist in our outpatient department at the Pediatric Mental Health Institute. I'm also the director of the Mood Specialty Program and lead in programming for LGBTQ youth in our department. I have a spouse and a year and a half ago became a caregiver to an adolescent. And so I feel like with a whole new set of eyes and perspective, navigating stress management with youth in a whole new way, and have a lot of I can't even empathy, but also like look up to folks who have been doing this parenting thing for a long time, and I'm really honored to get to be here and talk to y'all today.
Thank you. And then Dr. Hayduk.
So I'm Ashley Hayduk. I'm also a licensed child and adolescent psychologist. I've returned to Colorado. I grew up here, did training in Arizona, New Jersey, and Georgia, and then came back a little over a year ago to work at the Children's Hospital System. I'm one of our inaugural teammates out in our Colorado Springs division for the Pediatric Mental Health Institute, helping build out our service lines for outpatient as well as within our hospital-based programs. I have a recently new husband as of the end of last year. We're both work as psychologists, and I'm really passionate about working with kids and teens because I see it as really preventative. The sooner we can get them to learn these coping skills and get on a better trajectory, the better. So it's a group I've always wanted to work with. So happy to be back.
Thank you so much. And we are honored actually to have Dr. Hayduk kick us off, and she's going to speak with us about anxiety.
Yeah, so to start, I wanted to give you all an overview about anxiety. So we'll kind of run through about what it is, some symptoms, what are ways we might go about treating it, and then a couple coping skills because I like to leave people with some takeaways. And so to start, to get everyone on the same page, what is anxiety? So anxiety is an emotion that's characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes. So that can be things like increased blood pressure. It could also be things like GI or kind of stomach-based symptoms like nausea. And for anxiety, it's not quite the same as fear. We often use them interchangeably. I've seen some people also use it interchangeably with the word stress. However, for anxiety specifically, this is considered something that's more future-oriented, more of a long-acting response that's more broadly focused instead of more specifically focused on one moment. And there's a diffuse threat. So that means it's a really widespread threat. There's not necessarily like something specific like a life or death threat. So we're not like in front of a tiger and we need to run or fight for our life. Whereas that fear is that more appropriate, present-oriented, is a short-lived response. You have that clear, identifiable, and specific threat. Now we have a few different types of anxieties as well. So there's things like generalized anxiety where we worry about everything and everything. And phobias where it might be to a very specific thing. So some people might have fears of things like needles, if it's more kind of medical procedure focused, or they might have a fear of spiders is a more common one a lot of people might be familiar with, as well as different things like panic. So that's where we get a lot of physical symptoms which we'll kind of go into on this slide. So for the symptoms of anxiety, it can span a wide range of things. It can be physical symptoms, it can be mind-based thoughts. And so this is that feeling nervous, restless, tense. People might also have that sense of impending danger, panic, or doom. That's one of those ones particularly associated with our panic-based forms of anxiety. Some examples for those physical symptoms as well. We might have increased heart rate. People might hyperventilate where their breathing gets really fast. They might feel sweaty or trembling, feeling weak or tired. Sometimes we might have difficulty concentrating because we're also so focused on that present worry and getting caught in that loop of, oh, I have this big test coming up and I have 30 other homework assignments to do, and then I have to go run my track meet later. And then we just get in this cycle where we start thinking through all of this. That it makes it really hard to actually focus on doing our homework assignments or running our track meet. Some people as well, as a result of all this, can have difficulty sleeping. So it might be that we're having a really hard time falling asleep or staying asleep because these worry thoughts keep coming into our head. And then with that too, people might have a hard time controlling that worry. So that's when they get in that loop and it's hard to get out of. It's hard to stop or shift away from that thought. So it's starting to take over that entire day. And then kind of from there, that can lead into, we can go back to the last slide, Ellie, please, just for a little bit longer for me. Thank you. These individuals too, they might have an urge to avoid the things that trigger that worry. And that piece will go into a bit more on a later slide too, on what that avoidance piece can look like. The big piece that I also just like to emphasize when it comes to symptoms of anxiety, and this is one that we've seen a lot more recently, especially within that hospital-based place that I work within, is gastrointestinal symptoms. So things like we're having nausea and vomiting as a result of feeling so anxious and stressed, that these physical symptoms are starting to be a big presentation we're seeing with kids and teens today. Okay, we can do the next slide. And then going back to touching on what that cycle of anxiety can be in that avoidance piece. So one of the easiest things to do if we feel anxious is if we don't deal with it, immediately we're going to feel better. That's the quickest way to feel better. Now, when we kind of avoid doing that altogether though, that relief in that moment happens, but that's short-term relief. What that leads into then is when we avoid it in that moment, this is teaching our brain that that thing is scary. So say we have an upcoming math test that we have to take. We're terrified to take our math test. So instead of taking the math test, we're going to cut class. We're not going to go, we're not going to take it. We're just going to avoid taking the test because it's too scary. Okay, in that moment, your kid or teen might feel instantly better if we don't have to do the math test. There's nothing to worry about. But now what we've told their brain is taking our math test is really scary. So now 2 weeks from now, we have another math test. Our brain is then going to say that thing is scary, maybe twice as much or 3 times as much as it was the time before. So it's going to feel even more terrifying the next time you go to take that math test. And so that feeds into more anxiety. And so you get stuck in this loop of I'm anxious, I avoid it. Right now I feel better, but now it's more terrifying. And we just keep amplifying how terrified we are. And that's kind of going to lead into some of the treatments we do is going to be breaking this cycle that you can get into with anxiety and with that avoidance piece. And then we can do next slide. Thank you. So there are several different things that kids and teens can do to help with that anxiety base. One of these pieces is going to be that psychotherapy piece. So meeting with kind of a psychologist or therapist. One of the big ones kind of we use in the system are things like the unified protocol or cognitive behavioral therapy. These are things that kids will learn how thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, how all of those things can interact. And they'll learn ways that they can work on shifting different parts of their thinking or shifting how they're feeling using different strategies. So that in the long run, we can break that cycle because instead of avoiding it, now we're going to use different coping strategies in that moment so that we can work past it. Some of those strategies might be those relaxation skills. So our number 4 on here, where we're learning how can we calm our body down so that we can then go and problem solve and work on our more thought-based ones, because we need to be kind of in a calmer state to more clearly look and problem solve it. Hey, what happened? What can we do about this? And then we have kind of that exposure therapy piece. So that is where we directly put them in some of these situations that are uncomfortable and to help them learn, hey, we can manage these and we can do these things and we'll survive and we'll be okay, because this isn't life or death. We go back to the math test example. Taking our math test, I don't know so far anyone that's told me they've died from taking the math test. And so it's teaching them, hey, we can take that. Maybe it won't go the way we want it to, but we can take it and we can get through it and we'll be okay. And then for some of our kids and teens, maybe they need a little extra help while they're working on these skills and things. And so they might get kind of consultation for medication options that can help them manage that anxiety or that piece while also working on those added coping skills. And the main thing I really highlight to kids and teens is, while that might lower your anxiety feeling in your body, it's not going to change your thoughts. Unfortunately, the medication can't do that for us. We have to do that hard work. So this might be a support while we also do that hard work on learning how can we shift our thoughts. And then we can go to the next slide, Ellie. And then kind of that practical piece to leave you all with is these are a couple of the key coping strategies that I will teach families because they're kind of quicker, easier ones to try out to help calm that body. So getting it from more of that, like we're in that fight or flight, we're really anxious, we're really stressed. How can we get to that more relaxed side? One of those is square breathing. So this I like to give because everything's in counts of 4. So there's 4 sides to a square, everything's in 4 seconds. So that's where you and your team can kind of breathe in through your nose for 4 seconds. You're going to hold that breath in for 4 seconds, breathe out for the 4 seconds, and then you'll hold for 4 seconds again. And then for this, the thing to be mindful of with a lot of these strategies is I've generally found a lot of research says 2 to 3 minutes is about how long it's going to take you to notice that your body's getting to that more relaxed state. For her to do the square breathing, that's about 12 to 16 times around the square, just to make sure that we're hitting that 2 to 3 minutes. Another option is a kind of grounding technique. It uses your senses to bring you back to that present moment in your environment and helps give your brain something to focus on while the body can naturally calm itself down. So this is where they're going to do 5 things that they can see around them, 4 things that they can touch or feel, 3 things they can hear, 2 things they can smell, and 1 thing they can taste. Sometimes kids and teens tell me taste is hard. So for that, I tell them either you can skip it or you can make it a positive or a gratitude from your day. So that's going to bring in some of that positive thinking. That's part of that thought in shifting their kind of cognitive based thoughts. So that can help reinforce that while they're also working on grounding too. And so that's the swap or give teens. And so those are just a couple quick takeaways for you all. There's lots of images for these online too. If you want to like pull them up on Google, there's some pretty other fun graphics for them too.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hayduk. Really appreciate those practical tools that we can all be putting into place when we're feeling anxious. So now I have the privilege of turning it over to Dr. Nunez Moreno, who's going to talk to us about managing our stress.
Okay, I feel like Dr. Hayduk's presentation was kind of a perfect segue in thinking about stress management. And with, gosh, we can think of a number of stressors going on. I think it's really, really important, really for all young people and their caregivers. So we'll hit a few different topics about understanding signs and stress. We'll talk about some coping skills, kind of promoting health habits, which helps us kind of mitigate some of the increase in stress when stressful things come along, and really building resilience and social support. So understanding stress. Stress is that state of mind, right, where there's emotional strain, tension from something adverse or really demanding. And I'm sure many people have heard the fight, or freeze response. It is this biological, neurological response that's super primitive, has been in the human brain like forever and ever. It is the thing that says, hey, we either gotta get ready to get out of here, to fight our way through it. It really kind of gets us ready for action. We can go to the next slide. So thinking about this response kind of in response to stressful things around us, there's some things that can be helpful or unhelpful. And I think Dr. Hayduk really kind of pointed out, anxiety is different from stress. So like stress, again, it's getting us ready to do something. It can be motivating and it can help us work towards accomplishing something really tough, like homework. It's there for the temporary stressor. Big test coming up, final paper coming up, got in a fight with my friend. The stress is there kind of saying, whew, we got to do something about this. Typically, teens can continue to kind of think, organize, they can work towards a solution. It's just something that's saying, hey, there's something to pay attention to. Sometimes when that gets so big, it turns into something that's not helpful, kind of like what Dr. Hayduk was talking about, is it can become overwhelming and debilitating. That long-term avoidance she was talking about, panicking, Worrying about things that are not just this thing coming up, but what if things, like what if something goes wrong? Not something that can actually be solved and used in a helpful way, just really unhelpful worrying. And it's chronic, long lasting, and can impact thinking and concentrating. Young people have a number of stressors, and I think pinpointing what are the stressors in their life can also help us think about how do we want to hone in on these stressors? How do we want to prepare to deal with them? How do we want to cope with them? Where might there be some difficulties? Young people have stressors outside of them, which can be things like, gosh, what's going on at school? It could have to do with family stressors, bullying, health problems. There can also be internal stressors, which are more about how does a young person maybe deal with these things or the things that they hold on to? Do they tend to talk about to themselves in a pretty negative or positive way, right? Do they have trouble sleeping? Do they tend to hold in their reactions or kind of act out? So there's these internal and external stressors that we might want to be aware of and thinking about what are the things that are causing difficulties for young people. You can go to the next slide. So signs of trouble managing stress. And I think Dr. Hayduk really covered this really well, but I kind of put some things that might be typical and things that might be cause for concern. So it's typical that we see a little increase in moodiness in adolescents or in young people, maybe feelings of self-consciousness, a little procrastination, kind of dawdling with things, decisions maybe being kind of stressful, maybe sleeping later, especially on weekends and sleeping in late, wanting reassurance for things. These are all really typical things. Where there might be cause for greater concern that might be worth consulting with someone is changes in mood that are extreme, out of character, painful, long-lasting, that avoidance that Dr. Hayduk was talking about, right? So really pulling away and avoiding things that they actually really need to do, or things like perfectionism or unrealistic standards that then result in being really hard on themselves. Being so distracted that they have trouble with lack of focus. It's getting in the way of everyday life, doing their schoolwork, doing the things they need to do, becoming totally frozen with indecision, sleep patterns that, difficulty going to sleep, waking up multiple times tonight, waking up early, or needing multiple reassurance, especially for the same worries, and especially some of those like what if worries that can't really be resolved and needing constant reassurance in order to be able to move forward. So those are things where it feels like, ooh, this is like trying to get into bigger levels of stress where mood or anxiety is getting impacted. So why this might seem kind of obvious, and I think this is something that parents often aim for, I think it's foundational and really important of creating a supportive environment. So we know adults play a vital role in the well-being of young people. And so thinking about how do we foster open communication? As adults, that often means when teens try to do that, even if they do it really messy, how do we respond in ways that reinforces them and makes it more likely that they come to us? Meaning we got to be really mindful of how we respond. We want that to feel reinforcing. It'll increase the likelihood of that action, as opposed to maybe if I follow my urges, sometimes it can be worrying, it can be jumping into problem solving, it can be like, we got to take care of X, Y, and Z. I'm calling that school tomorrow. My teen may hold back if I respond that way. So really thinking about your unique teen and the ways to kind of respond that makes it likely that they'll come to you, and then taking the steps that you need to in a way that feels maybe feasible for that young person. Providing emotional support, validating their feelings. We're going to talk about that next. Encouraging kind of their authentic expression and being really kind of focusing on the message of what they're expressing more than how they're expressing it. That's like a gained skill over time. We've all gotten pretty good at it and we still fall short, I'm sure, all the time as adults. It may come out really messy at first. So listening to that message as opposed to how it's being given at first and kind of shape it from there. And then being mindful of, I think, when we want to validate feelings, we'll talk about that. And when it's time to solve a problem, oftentimes we need both. Let's talk about validation on our next slide. This is one of the most important foundational things I think with young people is validation, which really shows I can try to understand or I can see the emotion or experience of the other person. Telling a teen, I totally understand how you feel, doesn't always go well. So, right, we want to be mindful of language that I could imagine it would be like this, or, you know, that sounds like it was really overwhelming, right? Especially with how many things went unexpected. Oh, how frustrating. Oh, it makes sense you would feel sad. Like who wouldn't? And really focusing on them and their feelings. Now, validation doesn't necessarily mean agreement. Really important. It says, I can see how this might feel for you, even if I don't agree fully with the behavior. So we can still validate young people, even with not so great behaviors. So an example I put here is a teen who got a poor grade on a test, but didn't study at all, despite maybe a reminder to study, and they come home really upset. We might validate that by saying, yeah, it's gotta be really disappointing to get, not get the grades that you hope for. I can validate that feeling without validating a behavior. All right, I put some parenting pitfalls on there just to check out. These are not all necessarily negative things. It's just time and space. Validation often is great. And then saying like, hey, you want me to help you solve this problem, or you want me just to listen? Let's go to the next slide. Oh, I got 2-minute warning and I got a lot to go through. So I think there's day-to-day coping skills, and there's some for like high stress management. I think Dr. Haydu talked about some really good ones of like asking questions of like, if this thing happens, like, can I handle it? Another might be, am I going to care about this in a week, a month, a year? Having brief distractions, not those long-term ones, short ones, identifying plans to kind of cope ahead, naming if these worries, are these helpful worries that help us like do something, or are they just like really unhelpful and like not have a lot of purpose? And then in those high stress management times, Dr. Haydu gave a great example of paced breathing. Things like temperature change could be like holding ice, putting ice packs to the face, finishing the cycle, all that built up energy from needing to like fight or flight. We pumps a lot of energy into our arms and legs. So getting that out through intense exercise can help bring emotions down. And something called progressive muscle relaxation. You can put that in YouTube, you'll get tons of things. And this QR code goes to the Headspace app, which mindfulness has been shown to be one of the best stress management kinds of options. And teens or youth get a year membership for around $9. We can go to the next slide. Promoting healthy habits. Covering some of these different healthy habits is kind of preventative. It reduces vulnerability to stressful things. So if we're taking care of physical health and looking for balanced eating, not too much, not too little, avoiding mood-altering substances, even caffeine, if that hits people hard, sleep habits, movement, those things reduce our vulnerability when stressful things come up, that it won't hit us as hard. So thinking about how we can integrate some of these things. As parents, setting realistic expectations that can be academic, extracurricular, chores and responsibilities, just thinking and prioritizing about a balance to prevent kind of burnout, and making space for downtime and regular pleasant family activities is so important. And during those activities, one rule is we don't talk about stressful stuff when we're doing this family activity. We want that family activity to feel really wonderful. And then building resiliency. It's, I think, a lot of modeling your positive outlook, how you kind of come back from things. So if there's a setback or something that goes wrong, really modeling, yeah, this mistake stinks. And, it's an opportunity for me to learn something and change something in the future, as opposed to maybe being really hard on oneself. Noticing where there's positive relationships and really wanting to build those, identifying where teens can have a sense of belonging. Again, these are factors that reduce vulnerability to when stressful things come up. So in closing, stress management, it's really a multifaceted process. Like, it's not one thing, it's a little bit of everything, right? What are the things that help reduce kind of our vulnerability to stressful things? How do we cope with the stressful things when they come up? And how do we make plans for stressful things coming down the line? So be proactive, model your own stress management, and continue to work on it, because that's important too. And you'll be able to help your young person. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a jam-packed presentation full of all sorts of really wonderful strategies. And I love the call out around modeling a lot of these sorts of tools for our youth. And now I have the privilege of introducing Dr. Fisher, who's going to speak to us about suicide prevention and awareness.
Thank you, Dr. Knox. My hope today is to build on both what Dr. Nunez Moreno and Drs. Hayduke shared. And while I'm not able to give a comprehensive overview or in-depth training on suicide prevention and awareness, my hope today is to highlight the importance of starting conversations and to really give us as adults permission to talk about mental health, suicide prevention as well. I really like this quote that we hear from different leaders across history, that this time of crisis is not a time of just anxiety and worry. It gives a chance and an opportunity. And when I was thinking about the topic of this presentation, the sentiment that we have an opportunity to reckon with and address this mental health crisis really stood out to me. So again, I want to highlight the importance of starting these conversations. And something that I'm appreciating here at Children's is this societal cultural shift that is happening. Suicide is a leading cause of death for youth and young adults in Colorado, and thus the opportunity is to engage with conversations with youth about mental health and suicide prevention. Dr. Hayduke spoke to this anxiety and avoidance loop that individuals often get caught in. And I think as a society and as adults, the topic of suicide is so scary. And so we have across history had this taboo when it comes to talking about suicide. And again, and the thinking is, or has been, the anxiety has been that if we talk about suicide, that someone is going to be more likely to act out or to attempt suicide. And that is actually not the case. The opposite here is true, where when we talk about mental health, well-being, and thereby also talk about suicide risk, we are decreasing the likelihood of someone acting on it, and we're giving space for them to talk about it and creating that safe space. We all play a role in suicide prevention and awareness. Having ongoing caring check-ins with youth is really important here. So it's not just one big sit-down talk where you're speaking at a child about suicide prevention and awareness, but it's these ongoing conversations. It's these activities we do together, like Dr. Nunez Moreno spoke to. It's spending time together, it's talking about and modeling our own mental health and well-being, and thereby creating space to also talk about suicide. Conversations with youth about mental health and suicide should be developmentally appropriate, and the safe, trusted adult should be curious and non-judgmental. So for example, you might say, I've been hearing in the news a lot about this suicide stuff, and I wonder what you think about that. Or it might be, I understand that there was a suicide at your school, and I wonder what you know and what questions you have and how we might talk about it further. Practice active listening. So I like this sentiment that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So really listening to youth and hearing their perspectives is really important here. A child or adolescent might respond to this conversation by rolling their eyes at you, and I want to name that. And that's really good, because if they're rolling their eyes, that means that they heard you, and that means that you signaled that you are a safe, trusted person when this topic comes up in their life, when they're under stress, when they're having thoughts, when their friend is under stress, or speaking of having thoughts or plannings. A suicide, you're creating again, and you're signaling that we can talk about that's okay, and that we can manage this together. I also want to share that at schools and at doctors' offices and emergency rooms, professionals are starting to have these conversations with kids. And so that's where it's even more important to continue the conversations with caregivers. At the doctor's offices, at schools and emergency rooms, that looks like regular universal screenings and then prevention efforts as well. Next slide, please. Here I'm sharing some look-fors. So warning signs, this is a list of signs that a child might need more immediate support. And then I linked also to a Children's Colorado website. We'll be sharing more resources about that. But yeah, and Dr. Nunez Moreno spoke to this as well, but significant changes in mood and functioning. Verbalizing thoughts or showing behaviors that are concerning. Those are times then you would work with a youth to connect to more immediate and professional support. On that website, we share more of those subtle signs to look for as well. Protective factors, also really important to look for protective factors in the lives of children and adolescents. Suicide risk is related to really complex internal and external factors. And when we look for and reinforce through our connection with kids, these protective factors, we are really supporting them. Ways that we do that is by creating connection. So Dr. Nunez Moreno spoke to those activities that we do together, modeling our own mental health. Everyone has a brain, everyone has feelings and emotions, and so reinforcing that that's okay. Creating a strong sense of connection so that kids feel like they belong and that they're connected to community is really important as well. Next slide. It's also important to talk about safety and how we can keep kids safe from the most lethal means that we see in the research and in society. So the goal here is to have basic safety at home. And when we're seeing signs or when someone is at risk for suicide, that we're making extra precautions. The goal here is to create distance and time between a person who is at risk for suicide. And so locking up firearms, locking up medications, and then safe storage of cleaning supplies are some basic preventative measures, again, to put that time and space between a person who might be escalating. Again, not able to provide a comprehensive overview today. These are some really important resources. So Trails to Wellness has a more in-depth training for family and community members. CDPHE, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, has some really great resources. Children's Colorado also has a link to mental health first aid resources, which will show you how you might sign up for some QPR, which stands for Question, Persuade, Refer, and that can really empower us as adults to be protective factors and to be comfortable having these conversations with youth.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fisher, for sharing such important information about such a difficult and oftentimes painful topic, but really appreciate the guidance to initiate these conversations with our youth, especially as we know this has become a leading cause of death. So thank you so much to all of our panelists for sharing your expertise. We know this was a lot of information to digest in a very short period of time, but we're fortunate that we will have this recording available on our YouTube channel following tonight's presentation. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and transition us into the question and answer segment of our town hall this evening. And we will try to address as many questions as we can at a time allotted. So please feel free to put any questions you might have in the chat. Panel, for us to just start off with a couple questions that have come throughout the evening thus far. I'm going to ask Dr. Hayduk to take lead on this first question. If you wouldn't mind sharing with our audience, how does social media factor into stress or anxiety?
Yeah, so I think there's pros and cons to social media use. While it can help the teens and stuff stay really connected and find different communities they can be a part of, there's also the challenges on how do we fact check the information that we're getting. The added factor of how we can edit all of the content that goes on. So things like our images and things that can feed into additional body image challenges, especially when teens are already struggling with that in kids. And so I think it's trying to find that balance on how to educate them on fact checking, really questioning what they're reading, and balancing that with that is so ingrained in their social scape that if they don't have some of those things, they're almost excluded these days because they're not grouped into a part of that teen culture that they have now. So I think it's really that balancing act of being mindful that this can create that increase in anxiety, body image concerns from seeing all these things and being exposed to media that they might not have at younger ages than they used to as well.
Thank you so much. That balance is so important. Dr. Nunez Moreno, I'm going to have this next question directed towards you. You had mentioned in your presentation that one of the warning signs that caregivers and adults should be looking for is when a youth is exhibiting a more painful mood as a result of stress. Can you speak a little bit more to what you mean when you say painful mood?
Yes, think that's a really great clarification point. I think it was on the piece that had said, if you see significant changes like these ongoing, persistent, really painful emotions, and really I think that painful can encompass any emotions that I think can be really heavy for young people. So we have a number of emotions. I try to avoid calling them bad or negative because they give us information. Really, they're really important to our function, our how we operate. And some of these emotions are really uncomfortable, can make us feel uneasy, be unpleasant. And when that gets to a more extreme level and is really continuous, this can be things like deep sadness, like what we would think of with depression, or really high anxiety and panic. A number of feelings that kind of fall in that area is more of what I'm thinking about when I mention really strong, painful emotions that are just persistent, continuous, heavy, and taking a toll on young people.
Thank you so much. Dr. Fisher, I'm going to ask you to take lead on this next question. How can adults initiate conversations with a youth that has already experienced a suicide attempt?
A great question. I think about reflecting on your role in relationship with that child, right? Like what relationship do you already have? And how might you build on that? Expressing empathy and non-judgment. Again, I think it's so important to start the conversation, and the youth is hopefully getting connected additionally to professionals who can help have that conversation and give them a safe space and a confidential space to do that. I think that's the power of mental health therapy. So yeah, I think you start it in a non-judgmental way. Again, if they roll their eyes or say, hey, I've already talked to too many people about this, or I can't talk about it right now, you might pivot and follow their lead, right? But again, I want to encourage that it's not a conversation to be avoided because we're anxious about it. It is a conversation that's important to have, and important to have in little micro moments over time, and just yeah, it's an ongoing conversation.
Thank you so much. There's a number of comments that have come through from various community members, and I'll open this up to anyone on the panel. For those youth that have perhaps struggled with different mental health difficulties for a long period of time, is it reasonable for us to have hope? Or how can we help to support those youth that perhaps have been struggling for a long time with being able to instill hope in them that things could get better?
Yeah, I think hope is maybe the most important factor where suicide risk is concerned. And again, hope is very intersectional. Like there's a lot of internal and external factors that load into our experience of hope in moments and over time. If as a person is healing, I think meeting them with hope in different, again, we're not forcing hope on them. We're not judging them or replacing their experience with hope or telling them they have to be hopeful, but we're joining with them and connecting with them and just exploring hope together.
Thank you, Dr. Fisher.
Yeah.
There were some questions in the chat related to trends that we've seen over the course of the last several years with youth regarding anxiety, depression, and suicide. Would someone on the panel speak to us just about how trends for youth mental health concerns have progressed over the last couple of years, and are things getting worse, better? Is it different in Colorado versus the broader country?
I don't
I
have
can
the
s-
exact
go ahead.
statistics to share. And Ashley, I'll start the conversation if you want to continue it. But yeah, I think part of the reason I came back to Children's is the way that they're advocating and reckoning with this youth mental health crisis. And so I am encouraged, I have hope. Whether our statistics are showing that we've shifted these trends, I can't speak to that. What I am seeing is a lot of systems and supports that are working to help children feel seen and supported. And that's across those protective factors and then professionals as well. So I am hopeful by the opportunity for us to respond here that I'm seeing.
Thank you. Yeah, I think just to add to what Dr. Fisher shared, one of the things that I think we have all witnessed over the last several years is, as the mental health crisis really truly existed before the pandemic, but the pandemic fueled it exponentially for a variety of reasons that we all, I think, feel close to home in our own experiences. And so over the last several years, we've actually seen anxiety, depression, suicide rates double and sometimes even triple if we're talking about high-risk populations. And so a lot of times the mental health field has actually talked about this as the second wave of the pandemic. As the medical health piece has started to calm down, the mental health, especially of our youth, has really started to surge, and the concerns. And so here at Children's Hospital Colorado, we really have been committed in ways of trying to expand access. As we've seen in the chat, a lot of folks have raised questions about how to get access to timely mental health care. And one of the things we here at the hospital are really committed to is continuing to work to get youth the right dose of treatment at the right time, and continuing to partner with community agencies and schools, et cetera, to be able to help support our youth. And we'll have some additional resources that the hospital offers here towards the end of the presentation. Let's see other questions that have come up. Yeah, one of the other comments that I've seen quite a few times in the chat, and maybe Dr. Haydick, you could start this off, but I'd love to hear perhaps from everyone on the panel about this. As timely access to mental health care has become more challenging for youth, as the demand really has far outgrown the resources that we have for professional mental health providers, what can adults on tonight's town hall do? Certainly not to replace access to a mental health professional, but how can they help to support and bridge as they're trying to get access to healthcare professionals and supporting their youth?
I think a big thing that kind of adults and these kids and teens life can do is work on having that like modeling collaborative conversation about how can we help with we're feeling really down or really anxious. Like these are skills I found that help me. Are there ones that we can try out with you while they're waiting? So some of the ones we've touched on tonight. So things like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, that box breathing, some of the ones Dr. Nunez Moreno had put as well, and trying to build some of those while they're waiting, and really trying to have those collaborative discussions for problem solving when they're in that kind of calmer place on, hey, what happened here? What felt really challenging about this? And then really helping kind of problem solve together how they could make shifts and work to solve whatever might have been leading to feeling really anxious or overwhelmed or really sad or depressed in that moment.
Something that comes to mind is something that I actually recently did with the adolescent that I caregive for, and despite being a professional, like it's still hard sometimes when it's in your life, right? And so we weren't able to get into her provider for quite a while, and so I bought an anxiety depression workbook that had good reviews. I hadn't seen it before, and we started working through it as a family, kind of all answering our own questions. And it felt like something to create conversation and not pretend like something's not happening, and not just hold our breath until we could see the provider. And that felt like something tangible and helpful. And I also understand that in families where maybe teens are really pushing back against like relationships and there's maybe a lot of conflict, that might not be the best solution or one that teens really show up willing to do. And it's one idea for maybe, those who feel like, maybe my teen would be willing to do this if I put myself out there too.
Thank you so much. It seems like a common thread that I'm hearing from a lot of panelists is just the importance of opening up those conversations with our kids and asking genuinely how they're doing and listening for the response and having that honest conversation. Just being able to be present and showing that we care seems to be a commonality that I've heard all of you speak to. And also just want to highlight in the chat, there's been a number of wonderful resources that have been shared both by the community members that are joining us tonight, as well as the Children's Hospital Colorado profile. And want to just highlight that if a individual is in crisis, that we do have a webpage on the Children's Hospital website that talks about specific steps that folks can take to help support that individual. Just scrolling through our questions here, making sure that we haven't missed any. We have just a couple minutes left. If anybody has any final questions they would like to ask our panelists tonight. So we have a question in the chat regarding opportunities for volunteers. I believe that there will be some resources in the slides around opportunities to get involved. But if not, if you get on the Children's Colorado website that we'll show on the slide here in a moment, there is a web page that talks about different ways that folks in the community can get involved. And there's a number of different ways that you can do so. So I would definitely encourage you to look there. So it looks like maybe a final question that we could wrap up with has to do with how adults can help to support youth who are coming home and reporting difficulties around what's happening to them at school, whether it's bullying or other challenges that they're experiencing in the school setting, anxiety related to that. Would well open it up to the panel if anybody would like to speak to how can caregivers and parents support their youth and perhaps partner with schools to be able to help support them when they're navigating challenges in the school setting.
I have worked in the schools, and whenever I hear themes of bullying, I always think of the kid in front of you who is experiencing victimization, but I also think about the other kids who might need help. Whenever I hear there's a bully, I wonder if, or a theme of bullying, I wonder what other kids might need social, emotional, and coping skills. So I think building ongoing conversations and relationships with school staff is really important here. And helping your kid advocate, but then also not expecting them to fix more complex interpersonal things by themselves. So again, if it's a theme that's coming up, if you're seeing a child being harmed, I think of this contagion factor, that there's probably a number of kids who need support in this scenario, and schools are equipped to do that. Another theme that I want to highlight is I want to take the pressure off of one adult having to fix everything for one kid. I like to think of us all as protective factors in kids' lives, but if my kid breaks their leg, I am not a medical doctor. I don't know how to place a cast. So please, these are some really wonderful resources that you all have shared. And so please make sure you're checking in with professionals and not having to take on the burden of doing this all by yourself.
That is a really, really wonderful message for us to end on. Dr. Fisher, thank you so much. Yes, it takes a whole community to support our youth, and we are certainly here to help support the community, and each one of you are such important individuals to support our youth as well. And just want to thank you again for taking the time out of your busy nights to spend this hour with us talking about such an important topic. And we have a number of great articles. I've seen in the chat several times questions around resources, and would like to just call your attention to the number of great articles and resources that have been put on our website. So you can find all of those by visiting www.childrenscolorado.org/mental health resources. And again, please note that this recording will be available on our YouTube channel following tonight's presentation. So please feel free to look there if you'd like to rewatch this, and I'd be able to pick up on any of the resources that have been discussed. And if you have any questions that you would like answered that we haven't had a chance to address this evening, please feel free to email us at ccd@childrenscolorado.org. Here on the slide right now is one of the things that we were discussing earlier, ways to get involved or be able to volunteer to help support mental health of our youth. There's a child health advocacy efforts that we engage in here at Children's, and that the legislation also engages in, and you can sign up to be a child health champ. Also want to call out such a critical resource here on the slide, that if you know that if yourself or a loved one, a youth, is in crisis, we have some really wonderful crisis resources available in Colorado. There is no problem too small, so please reach out if you have any concerns, or encourage your loved ones to reach out. You can call the number on the screen, or you can also text the number, talk to the number. And then finally, just want to highlight some resources that we have available right now, and we'll be able to get youth access quite quickly without too much of a wait list here at Children's Hospital Colorado. We have an outpatient specialty program for OCD and anxiety disorders, and we have several intensive outpatient programs for both children and teens who are experiencing significant impairment because of an anxiety disorder or OCD. I'm also really excited that we're going to be offering 2 week-long summer camps this year that truly are meant and structured to be fun. And a lot of times we don't think about therapy necessarily mixed with fun, but these are truly meant to have camp, fun-filled activities to help support our youth. We'll have one for youth ages 10 to 18 that are struggling with obsessive compulsive disorder, and then another one for youth ages 12 to 18 with social anxiety disorder. And if you'd like more information about any of these programs on the slide, or any other programs that we offer in our outpatient clinic, please feel free to call the number on the screen there, 720-777-6200. And with that, our time has come to a close. So just again, want to express our deep appreciation for you spending time with us this evening to talk about our youth mental health and how we can support. And please don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything we at the hospital can continue to do to support you all. Otherwise, thank you again, and have a wonderful evening.